You press that. Good afternoon. If that's okay, I think we'll get started. It is 2 o'clock. I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are joining us today at Newshire Hall. This is the first public meeting to be held in the new building, and we are delighted to be here, and well done for getting here through the rain this afternoon. I'm also very pleased that Mayor Dr. Nick Johnson, who's joining us today, welcome Dr. Nick, and a few announcements before we begin. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and tweet during the meeting. Can I ask, though, that everybody present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. Please be aware that the meeting is being live streamed, you may see on the side, and that a recording of this meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. A couple of housekeeping points, as we're all new to this building. Toilets are available in the corridor adjacent to this room, and I will briefly adjourn the meeting after 2 hours for a comfort break should we need it. There's no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, we will adjourn the meeting and all make our way downstairs and out of the main entrance. The muster point is on the green opposite the main entrance. I propose to waive the committee procedure rule limiting members' contributions to the debate. However, we do have a lot of business to get through today, so I would ask all members to keep their contributions concise. In order to use the microphones when you're speaking today, you tap it once to speak and tap it again to turn it off. And when you're speaking, the cameras will turn to you, so you can watch yourselves back later on the live stream, should you wish. So, should you wish. The first item on today's agenda is notifications and changes in the committee membership. Would the Democratic Services Officer please take us through these?
Thank you, Chair. The committee is invited to note that Councillor Mac Maguire has replaced Councillor Simon Bywater as a member of the committee, and that Councillor Bywater has replaced Councillor Josh Schumann as a substitute member of the committee.
Thank you, Ashenda. Delighted to welcome Councillor Maguire to the committee today. And as a former chairman of the council, he brings a great wealth of knowledge and experience to our committee. So welcome. I'd also like to place on record my thanks to Councillor Bywater for his contributions to the committee's work in recent years, both as a member and more recently as the previous committee chair. Apologies for absence and declarations of interest, please, Rashenda.
Apologies have been received from Councillor Hoy, who is substituted by Councillor Dew, from Councillor Thompson, who is substituted by Councillor Nessinger, and from Flavio Vitesi, the co-opted member representing the Roman Catholic Diocese of East Anglia.
Welcome to those substitutes today. Does any member wish to declare or disclose any pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interests today? Okay. So, first item, meetings of the minutes and the action log from the 29th of June. We're being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting on the 29th of June as an accurate record. If any committee member wants to raise a question on the accuracy of the minutes minutes only, now they may do so. Councillor Hay.
Sorry about that. Yes, there appears to be a couple of omissions from the minutes. There was quite a discussion within the last meeting about the comments made by Councillor Slater, and there's nothing at all in the minutes to record that. Also, Councillor Hoy did request that training regarding foster carers and what they do be provided to members, and again, there's nothing in the minutes to reflect that.
So I think I'm right in saying that the training was on the action log, is that right? Yeah. So is that covered on the action log? I'm right in saying. Sorry, just checking.
I have a question about the action log. Shall I bring it now or later?
1 second, sorry. Is it on there?
Yeah, it is. I think safeguarding training it is, yes. I'm not exactly sure what. I'm not exactly sure what Councillor Hoy picked up, but I'm happy to pick it up with Shenda, Councillor, after the meeting, if that's okay, and make sure it's recorded.
Yep. Councillor Daunton.
Yes, thank you. I'm looking at the action log, page 15 of our agendas, and the action to provide details of the location of the county's small schools. I note that the action above it is given a date of November 2021, so I was just wondering when we would have the information about the small schools.
I understand, Shenda, we've now got that from Jonathan Lewis that we can send around, haven't we? That list of small schools.
Yep. So that can be sent round to committee members. Yep.
Thank you. I'd be glad to have it. Thank you.
Yeah. And if you'd like the discussion added into the minutes, we can add that in, Councillor Hay. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so providing, Councillor Slatter.
Yes, I was going to bring up something from page 8 on the minutes, because I remember there was quite a detailed discussion about foster care, and there certainly was a request for training, and I was going to bring that myself, as you know, Chairman. But I also wanted to welcome the fact that we have got on the record in the minutes some discussion of helping to bring new foster carers in by means of helping them to have enough accommodation, whether a spare room or whatever, in order to fulfil the duties of foster care. So I'm very glad that that has not only gone in the minutes here, but I know that I have had discussions about that with officers following, and I'm pleased to know that even if we find it can't be a howling success, it's worth having a report from officers that they've explored the options. I've already started talking with people about perhaps arrangements with housing associations. So I just wanted to make sure I was glad that's on the record, and if Councillor Hay wishes to have my blunder on the record as well, that's fine by me, because I think I've shown how interested I really am since then. Thank you.
Thank you. So this not really a discussion item, but a point for accuracy. So if we're happy to add in those items, are we happy to sign off the minutes as is? Yeah, marvellous. I will sign those. Brilliant. So if we're happy to approve the minutes, is anyone raise any further objections? Or we're happy to move on, and I will sign those as an accurate record. The action log was also included. Are we also happy to take the action log with the previous items noted? Brilliant, thank you. We'll take the action log as noted as well. Item 4 is petitions and public question time. We have received one petition which relates to the provision of transport to special school after school clubs, and this will be heard at item 8, which is the homeschool transport item. We also have one public question from Mr. James Boyle, who's a local resident. Mr. James Boyle, would you like to join the table? Thank you. Welcome. A copy of your question has been published on the Council's website and circulated to all members of the committee electronically. You will now have up to 3 minutes to ask your question. We use a traffic light system guide for those speaking at committee. This light will change from green to amber after 2.5 minutes, so that you know you need to draw your remarks to a close, and after 3 minutes it will turn red and we'll need you to finish speaking if you need to. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I have shortened my question to try and stick to the 3 minutes. So back in November 2020, the CYP discussed the TFE's plans to build a new secondary school in Soham under Wave 12 of the Free School Programme. At that meeting, councillors expressed concern of the lack of collaboration between DFE and the LEA. We now have a similar situation in St Neots, where the DFE is proceeding with another Wave 12 proposal. Again, there seems to be a lack of communication and collaboration between the DFE and the LEA. The LEA's stance now is that no action is required from them until the DFE's project has run its course. This lack of positive engagement is worrying for St Neots parents. It's also very disappointing that despite assurance of transparency at the last CYP meeting in June, the Feasibility Study to secondary school provision in St Neots has still not been published. Projected pupil numbers have been circulated, but no supporting evidence has been included. This information needs to be open to scrutiny if we are to avoid a repeat of previous errors. As an example, in November 2017, in correspondence with the DFE regarding the free school proposal, LEA officers assured the DFE that the existing secondary schools in St Neots could be expanded using Section 106 funding, with the County Council contributing just £700,000. In fact, Section 106 funding was never a possibility. Just 18 months after making this claim, the LEA submitted a bid for £22 million of community infrastructure levy. In that bid, officials stated that the expansion project was essential, and that if funding is not identified, there is a risk that we will not meet our statutory duties, and children will be educated in temporary accommodation or bused to alternative secondary schools, potentially a significant distance away, In other words, the same sort of problems we had at primary schools in St Neots. HTC, Huntingdon District Council, rejected the 22 million bid, and now, 2.5 years later, funding has still not been secured for the LEA's preferred option. The risk described by officers in the SIL bid has not been brought to the attention of this meeting until now. So will the committee please confirm that the feasibility study and the evidence for the latest student estimates will be made available without further delay, and that the issue of secondary school provision in St Neots will be discussed by the CYP at the next available opportunity?
Thank you. Do any members of the committee have any questions of clarification only on Mr. Boyle's question, first of all? No? Thank you for your question in that case. In addition to your question, you've raised several points which I will do my best to address today. I understand that you are concerned that there is a lack of collaboration between the DFE and Cambridgeshire County Council. I'm pleased to inform you that officers from the Council meet bi-monthly with colleagues from the Department for Education in relation to wider free school issues, and also have monthly meetings specifically in relation to the St Neots Free School. They do this to ensure that there is a joined-up approach and that the Council can provide any information or local area knowledge that is needed. Thank you for your question and for taking the time. Oh no, sorry. The reason that this matter has not been brought to the Children and Young People Committee is that this committee is a decision-making body, and as yet there is no decision required in relation to this project. I can though assure you that information has been shared regularly with councillors to make sure that we are up to date with the developments. It is also important to remember that the Council has no influence over the Government's Central Free Schools programme, and that consideration of the project for approval by this committee is not yet required. The feasibility study that you refer to is in its final stages. However, as much of the work is undertaken during COVID restrictions and during a period where schools were under considerable pressure, it's understandably taken longer than anticipated. As demographics for St Neots secondary school catchments have changed significantly over the past few years, we now believe that there is not a need to increase secondary places in the St Neots area. We have though decided to complete the feasibility study regardless of the falling demographics to ensure we can respond quickly if there are further changes which would lead to the need to increase the number of secondary school places in the town. If that proves the case, and if the proposed free school is paused once again, a proposal to increase secondary school places and the related costs derived from the feasibility study would be presented to this committee and to the Capital Programme Board at that time. If approved, the investment necessary to provide the additional places would be included in the Council's business plan. With regard to the funding of the expansion project, I can confirm that a CIL bid was suggested as a possible funding stream for the expansion of secondary provision. Following an initial application in 2018 for SIL funding to Huntingdon District Council, who manage and determine priorities for SIL funding, the bid for funding was not resubmitted as we were advised that the level of the request was likely to exceed the funds available. Since that bid, the demographics have changed and the Council is able to continue to meet secure capital funding. The feasibility... Since that bid, the demographics have changed and the Council is able to continue to meet its statutory duty without an expansion project, so there is no requirement to secure capital funding. The feasibility study will confirm the true cost of an expansion, and should this be required in the future, we will look at the various funding options available at that time. With regard to the detailed student forecasts and methodology behind these will be shared with you and will also be made available to members of the public who wish to view them. Thank you for your question and for taking the time to join us today. If you'd like to stay to observe the remainder of the meeting, you are very welcome to do so, but we will of course understand if you need to leave. Thank you. Item 5. Thank you. Item 5 is the recommissioning of the appropriate adult service and reparation services across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Helen Andrews, Children and Families Commissioning Manager, will introduce this report. Thank you for joining us, Helen.
Good afternoon. This paper deals with the recommissioning and procurement of two services, the Appropriate Adult Service and the Reparation Service, both across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. The Appropriate Adult Service ensures that every young person and vulnerable adult in detention at a police station has their rights and welfare safeguarded when no parent, guardian or adult carer is available. Under Section 38 of the Crime and Disorder Act 1998, the Youth Offending Service has a statutory duty to provide this service to young people aged 10 to 17. This service has to be face-to-face, not virtual or by telephone. It has to be delivered 24/7, 365 days a year. This duty does not apply to vulnerable adults at the moment. However, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 states that vulnerable people should have an appropriate adult present to prevent miscarriages of justice. Cambridgeshire County Council and Peterborough City Council's Youth Offending Services, Adult Social Care Services and Cambridgeshire Constabulary are the co-commissioners and funders of the Appropriate Adult Services. The second service, reparation, is an integral part of the restorative justice process. Reparation is a structured way of making amends for the offence or the harm done by a young person. The service provides a range of reparation activities and opportunities for young people to reflect on their offence, learn new skills. It offers qualifications that help the young person towards a career. Cambridgeshire County Council and Peterborough City Council's Youth Offending Services are the commissioners and funders of reparation services. Both of these services are delivered at the moment by YMCA Trinity Group across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. These contracts will end on the 31st of July 2022. Peterborough City Council and Constabulary have delegated their commissioning responsibility to Cambridgeshire County Council. Cambridgeshire County Council is therefore acting as the lead commissioner for both contracts and will enter into contractual arrangements on the Council's and Constabulary's behalf. The total value of the Appropriate Adult 5-year contract will be in excess of the £500,000 procurement threshold, hence the key decision. The Children and Young People's Committee is asked to delegate authority to the Executive Director, People and Communities, to award funding at the point of award, which will be in May 2022. Sections 1.7 provide a little detail about the commissioning activities we've started already that are informing the service specification. Section 1.8 provides the key milestones of the tender process. Section 2, in Section 2, the main issues are highlighted. The first one is the weakness of the volunteer model during COVID, when many volunteers were isolating and unable to do face-to-face work. This meant more sessional staff had to be employed. The second issue was around the specialist nature of services, which means it's a very small provider market. This led commissioners to examine and consider other options, including bringing the service in-house. However, the challenges are bulleted in 2.3 and far outweigh the benefits. The most economically advantageous option for fulfilling our statutory duty to young people and vulnerable adults detained by Constabulary is the recommissioning and procurement of one appropriate adult service across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, with Cambridgeshire County Council as the lead authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. I'll now open the report to the committee for comments or questions, please. Councillor Slatter.
Thank you, Chairman. I thoroughly support this report. Clearly, it's difficult work and we must have the right people doing it and have no breach or lack of continuity. I just had one comment about the report and a question about the process. The report sometimes we don't get around to reading the last bit, but I think the last bits, sections 3 and 4, can be really, really important, certainly for councillors and members of the public to see policy in process. For example, and this isn't meant to be a harsh criticism, in 3.1, there is no recognition of the impact on community. And yet, in 4.4, the officers have made it very clear that it has a tremendous impact, and not only making sure that we actually save some of our young people, and it's as important as that, but also the part that the community can play in perhaps advising on suitable reparation that can go on in the community, and in some context even to be recognised as reparation with an individual. That obviously is a matter for professionals to do carefully. So that was one comment, because I think that the policies at the end can be a really good checklist. Maybe it's something for you to do for somebody else's department, really. But that's just a comment. And the other thing is, I'm also on adults and health. I can't see the papers yet, but clearly there are implications for the work of that committee. And although we are voting for delegation at this point, I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but I'm just asking whether there will be a similar report coming to that committee, so that members of that committee can be well aware of the implications for the vulnerable adult part of this. Thank you.
I'll get the hang of this in a minute. You're absolutely right about the reparation community, and there is a requirement in the service specification that the new provider does make contact with communities to make sure that their activities are relevant. But it's the victims that take the priority. It's the reparation with them that is uppermost. Your second question about adult health, there were discussions as to where this paper should land, but given it's statutory for children and young people, the decision was that this paper should come to this committee. I'm sure we can do reports to the other committees if they require it.
Thank you. Councillor Hay.
Thank you. I have a query about the budget. In 1.6, we're told that Cambridgeshire County Council and Peterborough City Council Youth Offending Service are the commissioners and funders of the reparation service, with the annual budget being 90,000. That 90,000, is that the total budget split between Cambridge County Council and Peterborough City Council, or is it just Cambridge County Council's proportion? And I would like to know how much Cambridge County Council have got in their budget and how much Peterborough City Council have got in their budget. That's my first question. My second question goes on to 2.4. We're now being told that Cambridgeshire Constabulary and the councils have agreed in principle to a budget for this service of 245,000 per annum. And there again, I'd like to know the split between Peterborough City Council, Cambridgeshire County Council, and if Cambridgeshire Constabulary contribute any, because it's not made clear in 1.6 that they do. Sorry, can I ask if you can bring your mic closer to you, because I found it difficult to hear.
Sorry. The appropriate adult service has contributions, yes, from constabulary. It roughly divides into Peterborough and Cambridgeshire, both committing about 37% of that budget. It's equal. Constabulary makes up the rest.
37% Peterborough, 37%
Yes,
Cambridge.
it's an equal split.
And the balance from Peterborough from Cambridge Constabulary.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Oh, that was the appropriate adult. Reparation is again equally split between Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Yeah.
Just for clarification, so the 90,000 within the report, is that just simply Cambridge's 37%, or is that the total budget?
No, the total annual budget for
Which
reparation
is then
services
split.
is 90,000. Yeah, that's right, and that includes both contributions from Cambridgeshire and from Peterborough.
Thank you. Councillor Daunton.
Thank you. Yes, on 1.4, there's a sentence, the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner supports the recommissioning process too. What does that mean? Does the office support it in terms of funding or general support, or perhaps just flesh that out a little, please?
Yes, about 4 years ago, the Office of Police Crime Commissioner actually did a pilot around appropriate adult services out of hours, which they funded. The learning from that was then incorporated into the current contract, but they are not funders of this service. That was a one-off. So they have been supportive in helping us apply the learning from the pilot that was done about 4.5 years ago, and have kept us up to date with changes in various policing, and they've been able to facilitate different actions with constabulary when we've needed them.
Thank you. Councillor Maguire, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry if I'm slightly confused. I'm kind of new to this particular part of it. I've not experienced this.
Sorry, Councillor Maguire.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, then I'll look at the speaker. But in the recommendations, little b, we're being asked to delegate authority to the executive director to commit funding at the time of the award of the contract. And I'm trying to fit in what the previous conversations we've had as to what the maximum, and there must be a budget maximum that has been asked to agree to commit funding. What is that maximum? How do we apportion it? Does that make sense? It's not quite clear from the recommendation.
If I could, when we go out to tender, the bidders will write responses to our method statement questions. They'll also produce a pricing schedule, so we may have bids that are slightly lower than the uppermost budget, but that amount for the winning preferred provider is the amount that will be the delegated authority will be asked to award on. Does that make sense?
Come back, Chairman, but what happens if it's actually over it? I'm trying to get what the actual total budget that the county council is being committed to. Does that make sense? Still not quite sure. Apologies if I'm misunderstanding it.
The tender documents are quite strict with the bidders that they cannot bid over the price that's available, otherwise their bids would be rejected. So we've not really had incidents where bidders, certainly in the tenders I've worked for, where we've put the clauses in, have exceeded the available funding.
Councillor Hay, did you want to come back?
Based on the answer to my previous question, it looks to be as if Cambridge County Council's proportion of the budget will rise from 33,300 per annum to 90,798 per annum. Is that what you wanted to know?
Thank you to Councillor Hay, Chairman. That probably explains it a little bit better to me. So it sounds like it will rise, but it will rise by 3 times. But if that's in the budget, then that's fine by me, as long as I know that's what the budget.
Okay, if there's no further questions, I think we'll move to a vote on this. Co-opted members of the committee do have voting rights on this item. Sorry, Councillor Hay.
Can we have some debate on this? Because I've got 1 or 2 questions that aren't necessarily for the speaker. I want to know exactly what is in the budget now, because it's an increase of 57,500 per annum. Where are we going to get that 57,500 from?
So that's been identified as a budget pressure. We've actually gone out to look at comparators and how much they pay for these services, and actually what we're putting forward actually is in line with that. We can't get it for any less than that, if that makes sense. So we've identified it as a budget pressure for this year.
Thank you. That's all I really wanted to know. So basically, next year, I believe we had quite a deficit overall anyway, so this is going to add to that deficit by 57,500.
So we have got to pay more for this particular service.
Councillor Nessinger.
Just a quick question to Wendy, following on from that. I think it was mentioned at the beginning that some of the reason for this need is because COVID has meant that the previous partly volunteer support wasn't sufficient. So is that one of the reasons why this has become something that's more urgent than we might otherwise have expected?
Yeah, I think it's come to the forefront more, Councillor Messenger, but also it would be fair to say that if you look at other local authorities, they do pay in excess of what we're actually paying at the moment for this type of service. And the needs of young people have become more complex, and that's been exacerbated by COVID as well.
So if we're happy to move to a vote on this item, co-opted members, you do have voting rights on this item. So we're being asked to agree the recommissioning and procurement of appropriate adult services and reparation services across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and to delegate authority to the Executive Director of People and Communities to commit funding at the time of the award of the contract. So if we move to the vote, would those in favour of the recommendation please raise their hands now? And that's unanimous, thank you. No abstentions, no. Shanda, did you need to? No, you're happy with that?
I think you made that very clear, Chair. Thank you.
Item 6. So item 6 is the tender for the early years provision in Arbury. Thank you, Helen, sorry. Penny Price is the Area Education Officer, and she joins us to present the report, and Jonathan Lewis, Service Director for Education, is also in attendance today. I'll ask Penny to introduce the report, and then we'll hear written representations on the proposals which from the report, and that which we've received from Councillor Hilary Cox-Condren, who is the local member for Arbury. Thank you.
I'm sure you're all aware that the council has a statutory duty to provide sufficient childcare places for parents who wish to work and train, and also for parents and families who wish to access their free early years entitlement. We own a property in Arbury, in the city, which was converted for childcare use a number of years ago. The current provider operates and provides 74 sessional places for 2, 3 and 4-year-olds, enabling children to access that free entitlement. But the provider has unfortunately informed officers that they no longer wish to operate that setting. We wish to keep the setting open, for a number of reasons, obviously to avoid disruptions to parents and children, to ensure we meet our statutory duty, and to enable families to continue to access their free entitlement. To do this, we need to tender for a new provider, which is lengthy, and as the potential value of the contract is in excess of £500,000 and considered a key decision, we need to seek approval for this from Children and Young People's Committee. Therefore, we're asking for approval to launch a tender process to identify a new early years provider to run the early years setting from Arbury in Cambridge.
Thank you, Shanda.
The written representations from Councillor Cox-Condren, who is the local member for Arbury, are: access to local early years education is vital for many of our Arbury children and their families. As a local councillor, parent and educator with a focus on well-being at all ages, I implore the council to consider the need of our youngest residents, their families and our local environment. Preschool provides play, talk, exploration, development of fine and gross motor skills, socialisation and development of relationships. We know this This is such an important stage of a child's development, but absolutely vital for our children who have missed out so much during lockdown. Vital for both our children and their families, in particular for single parents, those living in poverty, and women, many of whom have had to stop work or have been under huge pressure to care for young children at home during the pandemic. Many of whom haven't had access to other parents and families for that additional support, vital for their own well-being, support and parental development, and many who are living in food poverty. Local nurseries are such an important part of building communities. The connections made are often the connections that support parents and children throughout the whole of childhood. We have seen the importance of these local connections throughout the pandemic, yet new parents and children in particular have been isolated. Without continuous provision, our children will miss out on play, learning and building connections. They may miss out on fresh food. Our most vulnerable parents living in poverty will have additional stress without support. Others may lose critical income in a ward which already has a gaping social divide. Those who may travel further afield to access nursery places may now need to drive, adding to the congestion and air pollution at a time when we're committed to reducing car use. Again, Council, I implore you to support continued access to Arbury Preschool.
Thank you, Rishenda, and thank you to Councillor Cox-Condren. I'll now open the report up to questions and comments from the committee. Councillor Sharp, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Chair, sorry. Fully in support of this, but it's led me to something else which is more general. It's probably Jonathan to answer. My queries are, seeing the figures on Appendix 2, I think it is, on page 33, 34, we've got provision of 1151 and requirement of 1474. That's just for Cambridge. I just wondered what the picture was. Obviously, you got that picture for Cambridge. What is the picture for the rest of Cambridgeshire, and how do we, sort of provide the provision for those children who don't get provision? And the second point is around funding. Obviously, being new to the committee, obviously DFE, I'm presuming, fund it, but do they fund it on a block basis? So would we have money left over if we don't provide it, or do they fund it based on the number of places we provide? If that makes sense.
It does. Shall I answer the first part of that? The pressure in Cambridge City has always been higher than around the county. I'm aware that the numbers actually in Cambridge City look like there was quite a large shortage of places. We're not aware of a shortage of places. We have been monitoring it. But in light of these figures, we are actually doing a review at the moment which seeks to get all the information from childcare providers about the number of places, so we can then compare this to the birth rate data we've got and see the true picture. We aren't getting information about shortages of places in Cambridge, and we don't have any waiting lists. So we're not concerned that in this area in particular that we have a shortage of places. In comparison to the rest of Cambridgeshire, I think Cambridge City is the area of most pressure, so we're not seeing these sorts of numbers elsewhere, but it's all the more reason actually to keep this setting open.
Briefly, yes, obviously it's a very important area, and so just coming back slightly then, so do parents have to apply? So I'm thinking, just trying to understand why there's a difference between what you think it is and obviously what in reality is happening.
Well, what we don't know is the impact of COVID and how parents may have changed their approach to childcare, which is another reason that we're taking a full review of it. They don't have to apply, they would go to a setting, and if their children were of a certain age, the setting would then make that application for childcare on their behalf, and we would pay the setting. I think John might want to speak a little bit more about the payment question that you asked.
Thank you, Penny. Yeah, I think these are very relevant questions, particularly at the moment with the sector being in a challenging place. So two things probably to comment on. One, in my Service Director report in November, I will be bringing the sufficiency analysis for the whole of Cambridgeshire around early years provision and what we are doing to create provision where we need it. So some reassurance there that this is very closely monitored and worked through. In terms of the funding, it's all funded through the Dedicated Schools Grant, so a direct grant that funds education services, and we have a thing called the Early Years Block. The council has certain discretion over that money. We allocate an hourly rate which we do hold back contingencies to fund particular scenarios and challenges that we face. And obviously, to deliver our sufficiency requirements, we do have to look at that very carefully and target resources to make sure that provision is in place. And I think you've heard from the councillor through her written submission the importance of certain areas of the county continuing this provision, and I'm very glad that you are supporting the proposal, because it's absolutely critical for families and that child's education moving forward.
Thank you. Councillor Nessinger.
Thank you. I think it's a really interesting. We probably shouldn't spend too long on this because I'm very supportive of the proposal in front of us, and we should probably just get on with that. But I would like to ask Jonathan. I know that there are skills shortages in lots of areas in the economy, and there are some areas of the economy that have effectively been shut down for the last year. I'm just wondering whether you're getting any news from providers that they're suffering from those kinds of skills shortages, because it's something that I would be nervous that we might start seeing.
It is a very challenged environment to make offers in, particularly as a lot of the roles are minimum wage. So that's placed the pressure on providers around what they can afford. But equally, young people looking to move into employment in the earlier sector is challenging as well. We have an incredibly successful training offer that we provide, supporting young people through the stages of qualification. It's a tiered approach to qualifications. And obviously we're working with the colleges, apprenticeship routes, lots of different routes into employment. We think it's a fantastic vocation. It offers a huge amount for those individuals. And yes, we're going to be competing. The news yesterday about record numbers of vacancies has hit us. But on the whole, we're holding our own at the moment, and we're very closely monitoring the workforce and making sure where it's needed, we'll support to make sure that we open up avenues for people to come into that profession.
Thank you. Councillor Atkins.
Good afternoon. I wonder if the officers have any sense from the current provider as to why they've chosen to not continue to offer the provision, and if there's anything we need to know or learn from that decision of theirs.
I think it's a mixture of their organisation structure. They're a national organisation. They have a number of set-ins, and for some reason they do feel this one isn't working for them. But I don't think that there are any challenges that we need to. And I don't think there's anything about the provision that we need to change. I think they just feel that this isn't working for them at the moment. It's very difficult to say any more than that, really. Sorry.
I have to say this type of scenario is fairly common. We will go through changes in providers, business models change, the viability, the ownership of these organisations change. We see mergers and movement around. So it's a very fluid sector, and it is one, it's a profit organisation. It has charity sector related to it, but ultimately, organisations will change their models and make decisions to go. Our role in the sufficiency world is to make sure the provision is there. So that's where we will work with providers, either on the sustainability side or their models or their staffing, to make sure they can work through. And if they can't, our role is to step in and make sure we facilitate the market to get that provision in place.
Councillor Daunton.
Thank you. Just a quick question, some reassurance for the future. I think you said you were looking at the future provision. I'm taking into account, I presume, the expansion of Greater Cambridge with the new settlements, whether funding is through Section 106 money or other routes. Maybe just some reassurance on that, please.
In the sense of new developments, funding for childcare, we normally put an earlier set-in on a school site when we build a new school, and that's funded through the Section 106. We also ask for contribution in the form of land for some sort of full daycare setting where we believe it's needed, and that is met by the developer and normally provided by the developer, so we don't get Section 106 for that. But where we put in sessional early years or early years on a school site, yes, it is provided for by Section 106. Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. We work with our planning team and developers across the county, especially on significant developments, to secure Section 106 to ensure sufficient childcare places on all of those sites.
I hope when we come to next meeting, you'll see that in terms of the overall plan for the county. One of the challenges we've got at the moment is the baby boom that's coming through post-COVID. So we will have to have very strong, robust plans in place to make sure that they're there. So just to reassure you that you will see that in the future meeting.
Councillor Dew.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Press the button 3 times, you go off again. Excellent. Straightforward question on 2.8. I'm new to the committee, so it's really a question of, you've got a budget there between 740 and 756,000 for the 5-year period. Can you give us a feel as to what that may have been for the last 5 years, just so we can have an idea of the growth or not in that? Thank you.
I'm afraid I don't have that information. I can find it for you. The only challenge with this is we had to produce a maximum revenue figure. Now this would be the setting at full capacity 100% of the time, which is what we had to put together, which is why you've got a figure between 756,000 and 740. It's unlikely that a setting is going to achieve that because they're unlikely to be full 100% of the time, so, I mean, I think we have to assume that it would be less, but I don't have the exact figure for the past 5 years.
It's a shame that you don't accept the fact that you don't. Just guide my thoughts on it a bit more, the same being news to the panel. Thank you for that anyway.
That's okay. I can get it if you want it, and I'll send it forward to you.
Thank you. So, if we move to the vote, there's no further comments. Co-opted members of the committee are eligible to vote on this item, so we're being asked to give approval to the launch of a tender process to secure a new childcare provider to deliver early years in childcare from 38 Colton Way, Cambridge. There seems to be a general consensus in support of the recommendation. Can we take that as carried unanimously? Yeah. Lovely. Thank you. Thank you. The item 7 is the Finance Monitoring Report. This will be presented today by Lou Williams, Service Director for Children's Services, and Jonathan Lewis, Service Director for Education. Martin Wade has sent his apologies for today. Thank you.
Yes, it's a very lengthy report, and obviously we didn't prepare it all, but we'll do our best. Just to say, there is obviously a much fuller session on funding and finances in the next committee report, so a lot of this will be revisited there. In terms of the July position, though, the key area of change was in relation for children and social care services, was in relation to children in care budgets, for the reasons that set out in paragraph 2.12. We haven't seen an increase in numbers, but we've seen some increase in complexity. We're able to mitigate that pressure this year in all likelihood. This is a very volatile budget as well, and actually that pressure has decreased a little bit since this report was written, but it is a very volatile budget, and we're very keenly aware that there's a huge shortage of placements for children and young people, particularly those with more complex needs, so it is quite a risky area. But we'll take any questions that the committee may have.
So opening up the report to comments and questions, Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is one that Lou will be able to answer. It's not so much on the financial situation. You did touch on it slightly. I'm going to take these out. With the increase, we have now got a rise of 7 young people in residential homes, representing a 20% increase in the numbers. Do we, CCC, have enough residential home places to care for the young people in coming into our residential homes?
So we are looking as a service at whether we should start to create some of our own provision. We did explore, so the DfE have launched a small fund for capital funding to contribute towards developing council's own provision. We're not going to be able to apply for that on this occasion because that would require us to have suitable property, and we don't actually. So what we will do is a full business plan. We expect the DfE to announce some further capital funding in the new financial year because, as I say, what they've announced this time around is very small. But we'll create a full business plan. As I said earlier, the pressure in the market for children's placements is extreme at the moment, so it's very, very difficult to find placements for young people, particularly residential placements. We only have a small number in residential placements, but as you say, they're very complex young people have very complex needs and are very high cost placements.
Anyone else? No? Okay, so we've been asked to review and comment on the report, to note section 256 arrangement in respect of special educational needs and disability information, advice and support, to note section 76 agreement in respect of the speech and language therapy, and to note section 75 agreement in respect of occupational therapy, which we have done. Thank you. Thank you both. Oh, sorry. Item 8. So item 8 is home to school transport. Before we hear the petition which we've received on this item, I will ask Stephanie Miller, the Education Officer, to present this report. Jonathan Lewis, Service Director for Education, remains in attendance. Please don't run away.
Thanks. I was expecting Stephanie to join me, but she's not here, so I'm happy to lead into the report. So, to remind some members, this report has. Oh, Steph is here. Oh, well, I'll hold on then. It's very helpful checking your hair when you're here. So.
Yours have finished a bit sooner.
There you go. Do you want to lead in, and then I'll pick up the.
Welcome, Stephanie. Thank you.
Good morning. Good afternoon. So the purpose of today's report is to explain the Council's statutory duties in respect of home to school transport, and also highlight those elements within the policy which are currently operated on a discretionary basis. The Council's statutory duties are set out within sections 1.1 and 1.2 of the report, which also includes our extended duties for those families from low incomes. Sections 2.1 to 2.6 set out those areas which are operated on a discretionary basis, and sections 2.27 and 2.40 highlight those planned and under projects which are underway, which are aimed at not only reducing the pressure on the home school transport budget, but also promote the independent travel for young people. So just to take you through the specific areas where recommendations are being made today, the first being whether the Council should continue to exercise its discretion and provide support to families in line with its existing policy. Our current discretionary arrangements include the extension of the walking distance for pupils aged 8 to 11, temporary or discretionary assistance for those most vulnerable children who find themselves in need of support following exceptional change to their circumstances. There is also the post-16 travel assistance for low-income students, students with special educational needs or disabilities, and students in care or who are recent care leavers. We offer personal transport budgets for pupils who are eligible for assistance, an enhancement of which is being given separate consideration today. And finally, the after-school club transport provision to the 5 area special schools, which is also being given separate consideration today. So we are asking the committee to consider whether the existing policy and arrangements remain appropriate, or whether there are specific areas which they consider officers should review. So our second recommendation today relates specifically to the transport provision to after-school clubs at the 5 area special schools. And since 2011, the transport arrangements have been in place to support the attendance of pupils at the after-school clubs to these schools. In January 2020, the CYP committee gave initial approval to consult on a proposal to cease the transport arrangements in September 2020. However, in April 2020, in view of the significant impact that the COVID pandemic was having on the education of pupils, the decision was taken to not proceed with the proposal at that time. Whilst we do recognise the benefit of the opportunity these arrangements provide, it is not a benefit which is available to all pupils with education, health and care plans and those attending special education provision. So the current arrangements are not, therefore, equitable. The Council is seeking committee's approval to proceed with a new consultation with parents, carers and schools with a proposal to withdraw the transport arrangements from September 2022. And we also seek to widen this consultation to include schools and families whose children attend alternative specialist provision across the county who do not currently benefit from this assistance. Our third recommendation to committee is to approve a review of all the home to school routes which are currently deemed unavailable for pupils to walk along, accompanied as necessary. Outlined within the report is the Council's planned continuation of an Investor Safe programme for improving walking routes to schools and for reducing the need on council-funded transport for pupils living within the 2 or 3 mile statutory walking distances of their school. Within the past 10 years, we've undertaken 13 such reviews, of which 4 were unsuccessful and transport remaining in place. We do appreciate that given the rural nature of the county, there will always be unavailable routes for pupils to walk along, but we do consider there to be a possible further 10 routes which could be reviewed. So the Council is seeking approval to the committee to undertake a further review of all the routes currently deemed unavailable starting from spring 2022. So our final, fourth and final recommendations to committee is to note that the individual independent travel training pilot project and its focus on supporting young people gaining greater independence as they approach adulthood. And finally, the recommendation to note the new enhanced criteria for personal transport budgets as set out within section 2.15 of the report. This criteria, we believe, will benefit families who would like to take responsibility for their child's and young person's travel, but have previously been prevented from doing so because the existing payment arrangements do not meet their specific costs. And therefore, we do believe that an enhanced option, which will be considered on a case-by-case basis, will afford families the opportunity to take responsibility for their child's transport, and which will in turn reduce the number of high-cost single occupancy taxi arrangements that we have in place currently. And it will give a benefit to the child and young person who will be transported by somebody who is familiar to them and best able to respond to their individual needs. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Steph. We will now hear from Nadia Bose, who's one of the joint petitioners who submitted a petition relating to transport to special school after school clubs. A copy of this petition was included in the published papers for this meeting. Nadia, welcome. In accordance with the Constitution, you have 3 minutes to present your petition to the committee. We use a traffic light system as a guide for those speaking. The light will change from green to amber after 2.5 minutes so that you know to draw your remarks to a close. After 3 minutes, it will turn red and you'll need to finish speaking. Committee members will then have the opportunity to ask you questions about the petition if they so wish. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for having me. Following the petition of February 2020, I'm here today to request that you remove the after-school transport from special schools from your planned funding review, and to keep this valuable service that benefits some of the most vulnerable, disadvantaged children in our communities. Social inclusion is vital to well-being. Our kids, with their mobility issues, access issues, sensory difficulties, safety and medical needs, anxieties and behaviours, experience real difficulties and barriers in having social experiences that the rest of us take for granted. With all their additional needs, they're still children and still have the basic, essential need for friendships and relationships, which are vital to their development, well-being and independence. For my daughter, Chloe, her friends and their families, that little bit of extra time at the end of a school day, once a week, has huge benefits, not only for her, but for the rest of any family members. It's often the one afternoon a sibling can spend quality time with a parent one-on-one. It's a time a young carer has a break from a caring role. It's the day a parent can commit to a working day without needing to put paid care in place. Removing the transport will result in many children not being able to attend, as parents just do not have the means to collect them. Charging for transport will also cause difficulties for many families. We're all aware of the squeeze post-pandemic, with SEND families often being the hardest hit. This petition was submitted before COVID-19, and those near 2,000 signed expressed the need and value of this service. This is before children and families have experienced severe hardship and isolation due to shielding and fears of vulnerability and health issues, before our children's vital health care and support services completely stopped, before any respite was now deemed as impossible due to health risks, lack of PPE, testing, etc. Families have been on the brink of complete exhaustion and collapse. There has been study after study that reports this. Research evidence clearly points to those children with disabilities and special educational needs have been the most negatively affected by the pandemic. It feels now that we're on the cusp of possibility in returning to some form of normal. But we're not out of the woods, and we have no idea what the long-term effects of going without services and support will be for our children. I'm sure you're aware that our children are assessed and awarded direct payments to help them access social opportunities in their communities. Large amounts go unspent each year and the funds are returned. This is because of the difficulties in finding suitable carers. So essentially, these social needs for our children continue to go unmet. Now, I know the transport's a huge cost from your budget, and also that you are under no legal obligation to continue funding this service. But this service is established. It's safe, it's working well, it's already in place. It's really valued, really appreciated, and really, really needed. If we're serious about the recovery of COVID and mitigating the effects of it, and the goals of improved outcomes for our children, then please keep this service for our kids. And just let our kids have what all other kids and their friendships and that time to just hang out with their mates after school. Please don't put up yet another barrier to restrict opportunities and quality of life further. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Do any members of the committee have any questions for Ms Bowes about this petition? May I just say thank you for bringing Chloe and her friends and your voice and their voice here today. Thank you. I'll now open the report to debate by the committee members. Councillor Netzinger.
Thank you. So I want to add my thanks to the petitioner for coming today and for the eloquence with which she's spoken about the importance of this provision for her daughter and for the other children at the schools. And I do understand what you said, and we will absolutely bear it in mind. I think the main thing I want to say is that as we take these consultations forward and these reviews forward, we will need to be thinking about the bigger picture of council services, and not only that, but actually work with Mayor Johnson here also, the bigger picture of bus services and public transport provision across Cambridgeshire. And one of the reasons why I think it's particularly important that we include the wider reviews within the proposals that we've got today is that I think it's really important that home to school transport is considered as part of that bigger picture of public transport across Cambridgeshire, and that we need to think really carefully about how we're providing public transport for everybody and for our school children and for our special school children. If we look at all of that picture together, I hope that we can try and build a transport system which works better for everybody. And that's clearly going to be the goal for the coming year or year and a half as we really review the way our bus services are working. It needs to be something that is important for the Children and Young People's Committee, but also for the Greater Cambridge Partnership, for the Combined Authority, for the Transport Committee, right across the county. This is an area that we need to be looking at really, really carefully. So while these are kind of quite specific reviews that we're looking at, I think it's really important that we consider them as part of that bigger picture. And if that bigger picture changes in the way in which I profoundly hope it might over the course of the next year, we might be looking at a very different picture for home to school transport, very different ways in which it's provided, and possibly slightly less pressure on particular elements of the budget. But that will only happen if we can review public transport more broadly and get a different picture overall. So thank you for that time.
Thank you. Councillor Dew.
Thank you, Chair. No, I think it's important to pick up on those issues that Councillor Nessing has just mentioned, but I think the other heads of review, they're also as important. In the rural area I live in, we constantly are getting problems with children being told you're within the 3-mile walking limit, and it says quite clearly that, you know, there's certain rules, like it's got to be a tarred pavement, etc., etc., and very often it's not. So I think doing a review and looking at how these things can be done across all these elements is hugely important, and I think it'd be foolish to just look in one area. So I think the fact there's a few heads there is a good starting point, and I would like to see them taken forward. And I think the thing to take into account is just because it's being reviewed doesn't mean it's going to be removed. It just means it's going to be looked at. And is there a better way of doing it? And sometimes that's exactly what happens. So I wouldn't send the petitioners away with the view that actually what we're looking at here is necessarily cuts. Because as I say, sometimes there are better ways of doing things. And sitting as I do on the appeals panel, actually listens to the appeals when they come in. We're not hamstrung. That would be a bit of an overstatement. But we are held down by the rules that we as a council have introduced, and they're quite rightly they're there too, because there's not an unlimited budget. So you've got to try and do it. But quite often it strikes me that people. The difference between actually being at one side of the line and the other is very often minimal, and it might be that there's areas we need to look at and how we can encourage sometimes the people who come to us, the parents it often is who come to us, who actually are quite, in my opinion, from what I've seen, ill-prepared, i.e. they come along and, we had one recently where we asked them if they looked at an alternative provision, and they hadn't, and obviously it doesn't help if someone hasn't. If they haven't, they said, I looked at it and it was terrible or whatever, but when you just said no, so I'd like to see something like that built into it as well, so we actually provide a better service overall, and I'll leave it there for me, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maguire.
Chairman, with apologies, I probably should have said declared a non-pecuniary interest at the beginning of this item, but I haven't read looking through the report. I have a granddaughter who is entitled to the post-16 students transport for SEND pupils aged 16 to 25, as picked out in 2.4 and 2.6. So whilst I don't think that prevents me voting on the thing, I don't think I'll take part too much in the debate on it.
I don't think it prevents a vote, no, it's declared.
I'm not sure whether my daughter contributes in any way to the transport, but I'm aware that she receives transport. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Slatter.
Thank you. I don't think that should prevent you from voting, Councillor. I did have a quiet word with the monitoring officer about a rather similar thing in my family. Yeah. My question was, Stephanie, I can see this list of the schools involved, and obviously a special school is only going to be looking after schools with very special children. I mean, we know, fortunately, that an awful lot of children that our own children are being educated with more straightforward mobility, visual, hearing problems, can enjoy a mainstream education with very little extra or separate education. And clearly these are children who have very special needs, yes. And presumably also need very special transport. Now, the figures we've got here deal with 16 particular children, and they're all known to their families in detail. The transport needs must change a little bit from year to year. I think that was the hint in the remark about the budget being volatile, so that some years it may well be children who can, with help, get on an ordinary minibus, and others who will need a separate custom-built taxi or something in between. Now, am I right in thinking then that these are average costs that the schools have provided, and they reflect as much the distance that those individuals have to travel, because clearly these are specialist schools that bring children in from a large catchment area, so those variations must be responded to, but also the individual children and their developing needs, or maybe even improvements. We certainly hope that that is often the case too. So these figures we've given are almost an illusion, I suspect, because it won't be that straightforward. I do really welcome the idea, therefore, of a review, because that review, and you did mention the phrase case by case, will be taking into account the important issues like, is the pavement walkable? It's not just the surface, but what's buzzing by at the same time. That is obviously very laborious, and I'm going to trust our office to do that carefully, and hopefully also the petitioner will know that we will do it carefully, and we'll be as fair as we can. But I can see why there is some special provision here, but I think it is only fair on the children in other areas who may well benefit from the same provision if they can get to it. But thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Boulat.
Thank you, Chair. I had one more specific question and one more general question. So starting with the specific one, I'm supportive of the review, but I think we need to really make sure that people who are directly affected are represented properly in the discussions. So I know actually there was a consultation in 2020, so I know 16 responses from parents and 2 from children, and obviously we're speaking about a much larger cohort. Even in the 5 schools under review, there are 58 children, over 100 families supported. I think the figure that was quoted. So my question was, like, on this kind of consultation, if it goes ahead, what can we do to actually hear more voices from children and actually facilitate children and people's voices as well as parents' voices in this kind of review, because I would like all voices to be represented. And the second broader question is about environmental impact, just trying to understand how the process would look like and what kind of environmental assessments would be done, because I know there was a risk mentioned that any change in the council's policies could actually have a negative environmental impact, such as if we increase the number of parents transporting children in individual cars. However, we also heard from Councillor Netzinger about potential lowering the environmental impact if we have better buses and other plans in place. So I was quite struggling on that one to kind of assess what is the actual environmental impact or what would it be. So any kind of further points or clarification on that would be helpful. Thank you.
So to answer your first question about consultation, I think if committee are minded to proceed with our consultation regarding the special school review, we are keen to broaden the pool of who we consult with, as the previous consultation focused on those families who are currently in receipt of the travel arrangements. But we thought it was really important to capture the voices of those families whose children also go to special school and that have specialist education provision, but don't get transport to their after-school provision if that's available to them. So we wanted to certainly broaden the horizon and capture as many views as possible in a future consultation that we might do. In terms of environmental impact, we have noted in the report that any change or any reduction in any transport we provide, there is a risk that families may opt to take their child to school by car and therefore increasing the number of vehicles on the road. So we need to look very carefully at that through any review of a route that we do, and make sure we work closely with schools to ensure that their plans and sustainable walking plans and such are in place and therefore can be communicated with families of their pupils should we take a decision to withdraw bus services to or from school because we consider the route to be an available walking route.
Thank you. So just a short follow-up, so would the more comprehensive environmental impact would be part of the consultation in that case?
I think the issue with safer walking routes will only become an issue as and when that decision is made. So we will obviously undertake a formal review of the impact that would have as part of it. So in terms of the special school after school transport, if we were to withdraw it, it probably would lead to less transport because we would be using the existing routes. But again, we would look to measure that, see what impact it's have. Obviously, we need to work with the special schools about the provision they have. Is it still viable? Will they still run it? If that's the case. So I think there's a bigger picture, but we're very much hearing the issue of environmental, and that will definitely form part of the consideration.
Thank you. Wendy.
I just wanted to pick up on the consultation just to reassure you that our Parent Carer Forum Pinpoint, who actually work with many children and families who have children with special educational needs, will be a key component part of any review that we undertake.
Thank you. Councillor Hay.
Thank you. In an ideal world, I would like to see every child who's eligible for free transport to have this service. But as I say, that's an ideal world. At the moment, what we're actually spending on it is $78,280, and that relates to 58 students over 5 special schools. Do we know how many special schools we have in the area who do not have this service, and how many children in those particular schools would be eligible?
What we do know is that we have 1,190 children in Cambridgeshire attending special school provision. What we don't yet know and would need to explore is how many of those special school places have after school club provision, which would mirror that at the AF5 area special schools. So that's something we would need to investigate further with each school.
I certainly think that while we're doing this consultation, we need to be looking at it in the expectation that every school would want this service, that every school who has eligible pupils, because at the end of the day, at any one time, they could turn around and say, we want this for our school, so we need to be prepared and know the costs of that.
Absolutely, and as Stephanie's already covered, we will be asking those parents in those other schools whether they would like access to that provision. You know, I do have to guard against this, though, that there is a cost, and we've had previous conversation in this committee about, you know, extending provision. We would have to look more generally at a budget that's already under significant pressure, and we've shared in there the figures and the growth over time. So yes, absolutely, we would get that view, and I'd hope at the end of the review we'll bring you a full position with all the options that are available to you, fully costed with the environmental impacts, so you can make a fully informed decision, and that's where we seek to take it to the next stage.
Thank you for that, and that is why I said ideally I would like to see every child who's eligible have this, but I think we need to go forward on the expectation that every child would want it and be fully aware of the costs and whether as a county we can afford it. And I, like Councillor Nethingsay, certainly hope that the transport provision that's currently being looked at by the Combined Authority takes into account this type of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Atkins.
Thank you. I wonder if I might just ask a few questions about the personal transport budgets and what perhaps you might call kind of enhanced personal transport budgets. I totally empathise and agree with the impetus behind this, which is clearly, you know, kind of slightly frustrating situations where there's potentially savings to be made if a suitable agreement can be made with the parent, and I absolutely appreciate what you're trying to sort of do here. Things that would help me personally with evaluating this, do you have some sense of, when you say in 2.14, every year there are cases, can you give me some kind of sense of whether we're talking handful, sort of tens, 50, 100, you know, what's the kind of scale of this? I don't know, in 2013 you referenced the current flat rate of 40 pence a mile, which I'm sure many of us would recognise. Do you have in your sort of mind's eye what you think that would need to rise to in order to bring in some of these parents, and what the, do you have a sense of where that would need to be? And I suppose finally, the criteria list, which I think we're being asked to approve in some sense in 215, at the moment we've got this long list of bullet points, but those are, I'm interpreting those as in some sense either or that in some cases it might be, you know, there might be some of these criteria but not all of them. I wonder if you can just provide a bit more clarity about how you would use those criteria. Does it have to be all of them, some of them, one of them? Just a bit more on your thinking on this, please.
Okay, just firstly on the criteria, it certainly wouldn't, the family wouldn't require to meet all of them. When we consider, at the moment, exceptional cases for transport beyond the policy, we look at, we have a criteria we work to, but it is very much on a case-by-case basis, depending on the circumstances that are presented to us. So we wouldn't expect a family to meet all of the criteria, and by that it's very tricky because circumstances are so individual. It's difficult to put a cost, what we would hope to spend on personal transport budgets to reduce down the other costs. But what I can say is at the moment we have a this year forecast of £5 million for single occupancy taxis for special school provision. So if we were able to provide a personal transport project to bring some of that down for some of those taxi provisions, then that would make the council a saving. But at the moment we don't have a feel for exactly how much it would be.
Just want to add something around COVID and what's happened during COVID. So we because of the limitations of the amount of children we were able to transport, we did offer more parents out the option to do this, and a lot of parents were quite keen on looking at those arrangements. And you know, cost-wise, 40p a mile, even if it was 3 times that, would probably still be significantly cheaper than if we were providing it ourselves. And I also think there's something around children in this as well. So, we have to seek efficiency through our delivery of transport. That can often mean 5 or 6 children on one bus, and it may take 3/4 of an hour to get from the first child's home to school. And actually, we may be able to reduce that time for that child, and it may mean that then, they have a good start in school. They're not sat on a bus. They're not, having to be supported all the way through, and they arrive in a different, state when necessarily they may be on a bus. Obviously, that will be dependent on the scenario. So, I think for me, this is a no-brainer to have a look at it, to look at the costs. I think we're going to have to be flexible with it and consider all the factors. And yes, environmental considerations need to sit alongside this as well. But I'm one very keen one to work again with parents and our special schools. And we particularly see around our SEMH provisions, the mental health, social and emotional mental health provision, where transport can cause more issues than the benefits it brings to. So we're really keen to develop this one further.
Can you provide an approximate, or do you have a sense of the approximate cost per mile of taxi provision on average?
No, we can probably have a look, see if we can average it out across the piece and have a look at that for you. But it will be significantly higher, is my view.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mrs. Bose and Steph and John for the report. Just going back to the review potentially of transport for after-school clubs for special needs special schools, considering the emotive nature of this, it would be good to know if you could give us some timelines if we do decide to go into reviews. How long do you think that may take, and at what point may we be looking at bringing it back to this committee? Thank you.
So as per the report, we're suggesting that transport wouldn't be, if the ultimate goal would be transport would not be removed before September 2022. So we're giving ourselves quite a wide opportunity to consult and further review back at committee the findings from the consultation.
It would be my expectation that we'd give parents at least a term's notice to. So we can clearly work back from that, and happy to bring an update at the next meeting about the stages if that's the decision of the committee to go through that process.
It would be good to have the timeline to make sure that, I appreciate the September 22 date, but the notice at which point we kind of know what's happening, and the parents, of course, and the schools know what's happening. Thank you.
Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points. Recommendation B, I find a bit of a, yes, we need to have a consultation, but I find it a bit of a smoking gun at the head in terms of, I don't like consultations where it sort of says that's what we're going to do. I prefer a more open consultation. And I understand the points that have been made by the petitioner. I know the school well. I used to live about half a mile away from it many years ago in Amesbury, so I know that particular school. I don't know the others and the good work it does. I think we do need this detailed review of routes, because I've got very rural areas in my ward, and I had a call last week about an unsafe place to stop for the bus, and that's a big issue for people, for parents, making sure their children are safe. So I welcome this detailed review of routes. And it's also, as I think one of my colleagues, one other councillor, I can't remember who now, mentioned, it's also trying to get as much after-school provision for children who possibly, because of their parent circumstances, have to come in and out to that particular school by bus, and they have to come home on the bus. They can't do the after-school because there's no other way of them getting home. And I know there's it's like anything. I'm sure Jonathan has this problem every day of his work, where it's balancing what we want in an ideal world with what the budget provision is. I know it's a massive balancing act, but I welcome the fact that we're going to look at some of these things. It may be that we have to make a decision at some stage that we can't do all of it, but you know, I certainly think we need to look at the various issues that are before us. Thank you.
Can I just briefly comment? Thank you. I think that's a really supportive comment. Obviously, we're balancing here equity, so access and opportunity for all, and we currently don't provide that. Equally, there is the budget pressure. We have discretion that we employ. We don't offer discretion. We've withdrawn other discretion from the budget over the years. So that's where I think going into this process, offering the wide perspective on the transport will give you a suite of options. And it's quite right that you hear an excellent view from the parent of the challenges of children. We must listen to those. We need to listen to those parents whose safe walking route may be altered as a result of this review. But equally, we want equity across the piece, and this gives us the opportunity. That hence why we bring the paper forward to you.
Okay, I think we're ready to move to a vote, if that's all right. I propose that we vote on each recommendation separately, and I also, in agreement, possibly take out the wording on withdrawing the discretionary support to proceed to consultation in section B, please. So if we start first with first noting that nothing will change until at least September, and that what we're voting on now is a consultation process for each of these items. So are we happy to, yeah.
My only concern is by taking out the wording withdrawing this discretionary report, the actual motion wouldn't actually tell us what the consultation was about.
Are we able to word that, Rishenda, so that it makes...
I think we'd need to look to John and Penny for guidance on that, please.
I think sub-phrasing it, I think what we're saying is that we do not wish to withdraw transport at this stage. We would review the discretionary elements of the transport policy, and that's what we seek approval to do. So,
Councillor, sorry, go on.
That clear? Sorry, is that?
Sorry, can I make some very brief suggestions? Recommendation A. I'm unclear as to use of the word "or" in the middle of that recommendation, because I think the decision is that the discretionary should continue whilst the review is ongoing. So could I suggest that "or" is changed to an "and" in recommendation A? Recommendation B with the school budgets, I think the phrase in contention is proceed to consultation on withdrawing this discretionary report. Would the committee be happier to proceed to consultation on reviewing this discretionary support, which I think perhaps avoids the issue of prejudging the outcome, but still makes clear what it's about? Does that answer members' concerns?
I think I see consensus. Canon Reid.
My question on that would be, I think John's used the term equity, and it seems to me we are actually consulting on the equity of access to such services, and my proposal would be to use that phraseology in the consultation.
Happy that equity is added by putting review in, or is that not far enough, do we feel? Luce.
I think we're in danger of making it more complicated than it needs to be, and I'd be very happy with Michael's suggestion, which is just that we replace the word withdrawing with reviewing. I think trying to make it too complicated in the actual recommendation is asking for trouble. So I would just be happy to accept the change of that one word, and I think the exchange for and instead of or in recommendation 1 is very sensible as well. Thank you.
So bearing in mind that we're asking consultation to review the equity, are you happy with that, Canon Reid?
Yes, thank you.
Brilliant. We've lost the TV screens. I don't know if that means we've lost the live feed or not. I have no idea what's going on. So if we now move to a vote, co-opted members of the committee are eligible to vote on this item. As the recommendation is quite complex, as I said, I will take them one at a time. So recommendation to consider whether the council should should continue its discretion and provide support to families in line with its current published policy, and whether officers should be commissioned to undertake a review of the discretionary elements. If those in favour would raise their hands now. Thank you. I think that was unanimous, Rashenda. Oh, sorry. Could you raise your hands again, please? Thank you. So moving to recommendation B, this deals specifically with the provision of free transport to the after-school clubs run by 5 of the county's area special schools. The office's recommendation is to approve the proposal to proceed to consultation on reviewing this support with effect from September 2022. Those in favour, please raise their hands.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you, Rashenda. Recommendation C seeks committee's approval for the proposal to undertake a detailed review of the routes currently deemed as unavailable, that is unsafe for a child to walk to school, accompanied as necessary by an adult. Would those in favour of this recommendation please raise their hands?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. And recommendation D and E to invite the committee to note the independent travel training pilot project, and in particular its focus on supporting young people to gain greater independence as they approach adulthood. We're also asked to note and comment on the criteria which have been proposed for adoption to inform future decisions on parental transport budgets, which we have done.
That was just for noting, Chair. So
yes, thank you. Brilliant. Thank you, John. Thank you, Penny. The next item is the live stream is still okay. I'm informed. It's just our watching ourselves on TV that disappeared. Short for a brief point. The next item is item 9. This is the COVID-19 Local Support Grant, Summer Holiday Support and Procurement Voucher Scheme. Jonathan Lewis will present this, and I've asked Jonathan to also tell us about the current update of COVID cases in schools across the county and where we're at with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I was just getting used to the motion sickness. This paper is split into 2 sections, and I will cover the latest situation with COVID in our county schools. The first section of the paper is a retrospective element of the scheme that you agreed in July. The procurement of that we weren't in a place to undertake at the time of the last committee meeting, and we used the special powers of the Chief Executive to award the contract directly. So the paper outlines that process. It talks a little bit about the value for money exercise we went through, the negotiation. So we actually paid less than face value for the cost of the vouchers that were distributed to families. And I'm really pleased to announce that it went incredibly smoothly over the summer holidays. We've had about 2,500 contacts from parents during that time, but the vouchers, and I've outlined the figures, nearly 40,000 vouchers, 38,000 vouchers were distributed to families. And we are currently, at the moment, going through the process of chasing those that haven't claimed to ensure they are taking up. And I've had a lot of very direct contact with families who have been very appreciative of the commitment the committee made around ensuring that those vouchers continued for the summer holiday. So I just need to inform you that that process was undertaken, and we continue to use the existing provider of those vouchers, who we have a very good relationship with, and it's worked incredibly well for our families. Obviously, the funding was made of 2 elements. One was the council contribution, which you very generously supported us with, and the other element was a government grant, the COVID-19 support grant, which has now ended, and we are just closing off the grant terms and conditions of that arrangement. But obviously our families, and it's become very apparent through the conversations I've been having with families over the summer holidays, you know, there is still a need out there. And interestingly, it's a need where people seek more advice than necessarily direct support. They're looking for where they can get help. And, you know, a lot of what I've been busy doing is brokering that support and pointing them in the direction of where they can go and some of the options that are available to them. And throughout the process that we ran, starting with the winter support grant in the December through to the final scheme that we ran in the summer holidays, I've worked very closely with Adrian Chapman, the development of the county hub, and working with our district council colleagues to really look holistically at what families need coming out of the COVID crisis. You know, that direct input of a supermarket voucher has been hugely helpful, but equally pointing them in direction of those other services, you know, picking up other challenges, so particularly around fuel and, you know, those white goods, and supporting families that didn't have access to what they needed during the COVID crisis, has shown, you know, that we can play a really important role here in supporting economic well-being and that social mobility, particularly as we see the effects of COVID on our communities. 1.9 of the report, you know, lays out the Think Communities approach. This is probably the greatest example we've had so far of actually joining up those people out there, working together effectively, developing our hub arrangements, and, you know, having a common approach for families, and we don't want to lose that momentum. And equally, we know the challenge of COVID is still not over. We've got holidays coming up where families will need support. You know, we have seen certain areas of the county, certainly our numbers that our pupil premium and our free school meal children have increased substantially during that period, and we want to make sure that offer continues to be there for the families. So 1.14 of the report on page 101 outlines the suggested model, very much focused in around working through the county hub, looking at all the people out there, so be it a food bank, be it the district council, be it the voluntary sector, being other organisations that we want to work with, making sure that where we need to, we can directly support families through a direct award scheme, and making sure the infrastructure that is so important, and I think we've demonstrated the importance of the infrastructure, is there to connect people to the provision that is available. And the work that Adrian's outlined in this paper, I think very eloquently shows the role that the local authority can continue to play to make sure families are supported. There is existing resources in place. We wish to bend those, and using one of Wendy's terms, bend those resources to ensure this continues to deliver. And obviously we want to seek the view of the committee on the proposal that we put in front of you to make sure that support's in place. So, Chair, shall I stop there, and then I'll pick up the COVID situation after the questions.
We'll pick up COVID later, that's absolutely fine. Can I just put on record thanks to you and your team for dealing with those 2,500 inquiries that you had over the summer. I know that your last year has been dealt with vouchers and possibly one of your least favourite items, dealing with queries, but I know that you've spent hours and hours on that, and we'd like to put on record our thanks to you and your team for that. Opening this to questions and debate by the committee. Councillor Daunton.
Yes, thank you very much for mentioning the work with the district councils. I'm very conscious how important those links were, and how district councils were so closely engaged with their own communities as well as with the county. And I'd also just like to mention the importance of the local community volunteer groups that grew up very quickly and very effectively in different parts of the county, and how important they were. And just to sort of really to thank those as well as you and all that you've been doing.
Councillor Slatter.
I rather hesitate because I'm kind of following Councillor Daunton. I also was very much involved in the volunteer service, which grew up out of lockdown, and people were splendid, and you felt it's there's sort of, we were all pulling together, as it were. I don't think we can be too optimistic about that same volunteer effort staying there. As you say, we don't want to lose some of the momentum, but we have to be realistic. We have already lost a lot of it because that came from people being on furlough, wanting to be able to help one another and being given the means, largely because of the volunteers, as Councillor Daunton has said, and that crucial local government framework of the district council getting together with the county council and the churches and other faith groups and doing the job. But we must not be too optimistic, I think, about volunteers being still there. They sort of, in the committee of the Communities and Partnerships Committee, we voted to renew what's it called now, Support Cambridgeshire, where we've got an organisation that can make the most of the volunteers who are there, who can perhaps have the more spontaneous type of volunteering that people are able to give even when they're back at work and still have family responsibilities and so on. So I think that's where the professionals come in, and I'm very glad we're going to carry on with that. But I don't usually want to cast a damper, but let's be realistic. Some of that impetus will not return because lockdown, we hope, will not return. But otherwise, let's do certainly what we can, and certainly as councillors, to make sure we get the help where we can to the people who need it. Thank you.
Councillor King.
Thank you. And John, first just join the chorus of saying thank you so much for the work you and your team have been doing over the summer and earlier, of course, over the pandemic onward. What I want to explore is what we understand, and from the feedback you mentioned from parents, is that if we use, if I may take the term of, say, end user experience, so for parents of the children eligible for the vouchers, it was a reasonably straightforward, I hope in most cases, experience to access the vouchers and spend them. How confident are we that as we move to this different model, that experience will be equally straightforward and the communication, obviously, probably all of us will need to support you on that, but we will have a good communication plan to explain what is changing and how they can still access the support. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point because we've done a very direct approach so far. So the vouchers arrived in somebody's mobile phone or in their email. What I do have to say, though, and the benefit is that we're building on an existing brand, essentially. Every letter I've sent out has referenced the county hub and what's available there. And, we will obviously work very closely with school leaders to identify families. I'm very keen that we get some direct marketing into the families that previously accessed the vouchers to make sure that is available. And obviously using everyone that's coming into contact with families to highlight these opportunities. I think the single front door that we can offer is the key advantage here. Instead of having to go to different organisations or know on the ground what's there, one simple phone number or an email address, it goes in and it goes out to wherever it needs to go to. And I've been hugely impressed by Adrian and his team, and that's been volunteers across the service and elsewhere who have been able to take on families' issues and get the various professionals in place. So it's going to be really key to keep that going, but I do think we have a trusted brand and approach now, and the more we can build on that, the better.
Okay, thank you.
Wendy?
I just wanted to build on what John said, but also what others has said about what's happened during COVID. And one of the things that did happen was we stood up a community resource group as part of the local resilience forum, and that comprised of over 50 agencies and organisations, which was Hunts Forum, equally all of the district council, our voluntary community, faith sector, parish councils, town councils, you name it. Those 50 organisations have committed to continue in working with in this way because they genuinely believe it makes a difference. So I feel confident that we still have the commitment of people, but I completely agree that the volunteer bank will be smaller. But we have the commitment of people to continue with the way we worked during COVID, which I think is incredibly positive.
Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. One question for Jonathan, but another comment really. I think the fact that it had to be done by emergency powers, it's nearly 3 months since we had a last meeting, so I think we need more regular meetings personally, because it's a very important area. The one question I've got is relating to funding. Basically, basically the scheme will stop next year, and looking at 1.2, where we spent basically 1.9 million currently. In 2.15, we're looking at providing 400,000 from Think Communities. Now, I know most of that 1.9 was funded by government. I'm just wondering how you're balancing the expectations, because the danger may be that parents will think this is carrying on for, perpetuity, for want of a better word, and with the balance that obviously we've got limited funding. I know we're going to outside providers, which will sort of take some of that burden away from us, but there must be that juggling act you've got to make.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the issues. We have lots of parents contact us. Will there be a scheme at October half term? My view is that there is a core within that free school meal category who absolutely need support. That's where we will be encouraging schools to highlight and work with those parents. Making sure that people are aware there's a range of offers. I actually think the 400,000 will go further, because we'll be drawing in other capacity and resources as opposed to a direct payment that went straight into a family. You'll probably see a bigger return on it. But it's just going to be really important that people know where they can go if they need help. And it may not be a £15 a week voucher, which is what we've done historically. It might be a food parcel that they need, which actually can be delivered simply and cheaply through a third sector organisation, and a cost-wise a lower cost to see them through. It's about supporting families. We really hope, given the positive news around the economy and the jobs market, that actually the need that was there at Christmas, and we definitely experienced that through certainly the correspondence I had, is easing all the time, and we feel this is an appropriate step down into that process, and less families will need that support. But obviously, we will continue to monitor this. Bear in mind, alongside this, we still will operate the HAF scheme, so the Holiday Activities Fund scheme. There will be a run of that in the Christmas holidays, and we have substantial resources still available, and food will be a part of that scheme. So particularly coming into Christmas, where it is more challenging, there's another offer that will sit alongside this and still be available to families that meet the free school meal criteria.
Wendy, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that one of the things for us, I think, is by putting in some of this low-level support and trying to support families with the root cause of their challenges, actually prevents future spend in more expensive areas. And that's what we're really trying to focus on, recognising the challenges around the budgets, but thinking about actually if we don't put that support in now, actually further down the line, those families are likely to present with more specialist type needs, which is more expensive but not good for the families either.
Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, Chair. One question, one clarification, if you could. The clarification, you referenced maintaining investment in the current universal system, e.g. CAB/CLAS. I'm sorry if I should know those acronyms off the top of my head, but I'm afraid I don't. Could you clarify what those are for me? And the question is around the direct support award scheme, which you're going to make accessible to key partners. Could you just characterise for me those key partners? Are you anticipating that? I don't know if you're thinking the district councils or whether you're thinking at smaller levels, sort of particular charities, or a kind of wider spread. It'd be good just to understand. I appreciate the one front door, but obviously behind that's going to be significant complexity.
Absolutely. So CAB, Citizen Advice Bureau, CLAS is the Cambridgeshire Local Assistance Scheme, I believe. I've just Googled that, so that was quite efficient. I managed to get that quickly. The expectation it would be that we connect the public sector, and that I include the voluntary sector in that. So we have included in the report, in the appendix, the sort of list of services that the district councils provide, the different routes in. You know, absolutely, we want to work with parish councils, we want to work with charities, we'd want to work with schools and PDAs, parent teachers associations, to work on that. You know, the intention is to mobilise the provision that's there in that public facing sector provision and make sure it's efficiently delivered. You know, I think one of the issues we saw in COVID is there was just too much offer, and sometimes things didn't get taken up that were really helpful. The more we can coordinate, the more we can bring together people under a single banner and direct people to where they need to go, the less long-term support I think we're going to need. So that's where I think it's really interesting that we're trying to formalise it and continue to keep it going. Certainly I'd be referring families into it for various needs, and you know, making sure my services are joined up in there as well. So you know, for parents worried and anxiety around attendance service as part of their discussion around their finances, well, brilliant, we can join that up if we're all part of one front door. So that's where I think the positivity comes from.
Sorry, can I just a clarification on the direct award scheme element specifically? What range of partners? Obviously, I appreciate there's a huge range for the system as a whole, but in terms of the direct awards specifically, what's whether you're anticipating working with all of those or if it's a smaller list?
My understanding is that money will be held within the council. We will look at where the needs are coming from. You know, we have direct routes to give out food and fuel and cash, but equally sometimes, and we have done this previously, we've granted some of those organisations. So we've looked at actually that organisation in that area, we know there's an emerging need, we will grant into that. You know, I think this is probably something Adrian's going to need to come back on, or Wendy may want to comment on. But I think, you know, the great thing about the grant is, and you know, where I think the government did this exceptionally well, is that it was not ring-fenced, and we were able to be creative and do what was needed when it was needed. So I think what we're looking through the direct award scheme is to have that flexibility and retain the ability to direct to different organisations. But Wendy, you might want to comment.
Yes, sorry, because so we have given small amounts of money to the district council who've chosen to give out direct awards themselves or to use their local voluntary organisations. It's different for every district council, and actually we've found that they use a very small amount of money for very specific things. But certainly Adrian's been working with leads in the district councils to think about what best to do, and it's different for each area.
Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. Just a general comment, really. I feel a little bit concerned that we might be on a bit of a slippery slope if key decisions are being made for emergency powers and not in front of this committee. I feel that things have been cut back so much that if we are on that road of using emergency powers instead of decisions being made here in this room, I think we need to review that.
Can I just comment on that? I think the challenge here, this isn't the normal practice we go through. We weren't notified of the grant in time. The procurement process was complicated because the government had introduced a new framework that wasn't suitable and we couldn't access. So we had to use that power. If we wouldn't have done that, we wouldn't have got the vouchers out for the start of the summer holiday. So I think it is absolutely exceptional. It's the first time I've ever used it in Cambridgeshire. I don't intend going through that process again. You know, absolute transparency. I think the options we had were limited to because of the way our systems were set up and the timescale to mobilise using a different provider, which essentially was the decision that has been put in front of the Chief Exec.
Okay, if we're happy, I think we'll move to a vote and then ask you to do your COVID update afterwards, if that's all right. Thank you, John. Sorry, Councillor Hay.
I'm just looking through the basket of service information from members in Cambridgeshire, and if we look down, you've got South Cam services, Cambridge City services, East Cam services and Huntingdonshire services, nothing for Fenland.
Yeah, it's not. It doesn't appear in mine either. So I'll ask Adrian to pull that slide, and we'll send that around to you as well. So I think there is reference to Fenland services in the different categories, but not
Higher
slide.
up there is, but certainly not there with addresses.
I'll ask Adrian to put that together.
Thank you.
There is on page 134 has Fenland information, certainly. Page 134. All right, we'll make sure that those are added in and sent around. Thank you. So we're being asked to vote on this. Co-opted members are... Sorry about this.
Sorry, Chair. I think if you're going to hear the COVID update, then it needs to be as part of the report. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry, Jonathan, you don't get a break. Thank you.
Just noting the time and the toilet break's coming, so I'll go quickly. The term has opened successfully. Our leaders in all our educational settings worked incredibly hard to get ready. I think it's fair to say one of the biggest challenges we're facing is anxiety around the changes that have happened since the 16th of August in terms of the way we handle COVID cases. With the scenario now being where there is a confirmed case, we rely on NHS test and trace to undertake any close contact tracing, which we did previously, and where a child or an adult who has had 2 vaccinations is no longer required to self-isolate and continue to attend school or work, if that's the scenario. So we've had to deal with that big change in process. The current situation is challenging, and as members, I send you around those weekly updates. You would have seen this week that there is a significant greater number of schools that have appeared with cases, and that trend has continued this week. We continue to monitor very closely. We have a requirement around contingency frameworks, whereby we can implement further measures when we need to ensure the safety of schools and to minimise COVID cases. And to date, we have looked at things like face coverings in circulation spaces and some bubbling, as we're now calling it, of groups to try and ease the pressure where we have a significant number of cases in a particular class. I don't think we've seen the peak yet. We did see a rise in cases as a result of the testing that secondary schools conducted in the first week of opening, when they did 2 tests in the first 2 weeks. I think next week will be more telling in terms of any transmission on the basis of the schools being open, and certainly following what's happened in Scotland, I am expecting a rise in cases. But the focus continues to be keeping children in school, making sure environments are safe, and certainly that local authority and public health advice being available as and when professionals need it to make good decisions about moving forward. So I think it's going to be a challenging half term, and I'll happily update you in my November report on the current situation, but obviously you'll continue to receive weekly updates on the position in education.
Any comments or questions on COVID update? Okay. So if we move to the vote, sorry, Councillor Smith.
Just a point on the recommendations on recommendation B. Whereas in principle I have no problems with it at all, other than the from October 21 half term onwards, that has no end date. Is there an end date?
I think the end date depends on the end of COVID, but Jonathan, you might have
I think it will be an evolving picture at some point. We may not need to provide this offer, but I think we don't know when that could happen. So equally, there is huge benefit from this join-up, both on society and supporting families moving forward. So I think that was intentionally left open, and I think it would be helpful if the committee perhaps after the Christmas break considered the impact and perhaps reviewed this provision going forward. But I think at the moment it's as and when it's needed.
The general public's point of view, they need, what we're saying is it'll also be there for the Christmas break also.
I think Christmas definitely would be part of the consideration, hence the half as well. So
thank you. Thank you, Chair.
So if we move to the vote, co-opted members are eligible to vote on this item. We're being asked to note the decision made under emergency powers by the Chief Executive of Cambridgeshire County Council to undertake the allocation of supermarket vouchers via Wanda for the summer holiday period, which we have done, and B, to endorse the model of support outlined in section 2 to mainstream the COVID support for vulnerable families from October 2021 half term onwards. All those in favour, please raise their hands.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you, Rishenda. Thank you. I propose a 10-minute comfort break, if that's all right for everybody, and we'll reconvene. So I make it 16:03, so 16:13. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. If we're about there, so our next item, item 10, is the Service Director for Children's Safeguardings report. Lou Williams, thank you, Director of Children's Services, will present this report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I know you will have read the report. It is lengthy. I know that there's some new members on committee, and I've not presented this report in this committee, as it were, before. So I took the opportunity just to try and flesh it out a little bit and provide a bit more detail about what is essentially a very complex set of services that is around children's social care services. I suppose just some general observations, and just open up for some questions. I'm often asked about volume, increased demand, things like that, and I think it's obviously really positive that schools are back, that pupils are back into schools. We are seeing a continued, I think, impact for some families, and probably those families that are at the more vulnerable end of the COVID pandemic. What we are seeing is perhaps a more increase in terms of volume, in terms of our more preventative services, so things like parenting support, parenting classes, those sorts of things, requests for informal advice from child and family centres. In terms of our statutory service, so things like, which is really around the children in need and children in need of protection end of the service, we haven't actually seen an increase in volume, but we have seen an increase in complexity, and that's continued. And you can, in terms of the numbers of children who are subject to child protection plans, that's gone up a lot, considerably, over the course of the pandemic. It has, so there's a chart, I'm scrolling down to find it. It has started to level off, and over the last couple of months, that trend, so yeah, it's chart just below paragraph 2.33. So it has started to level off, but we were down to around 320 at the start of the pandemic, children subject to child protection plan. We're currently still at 430 odd children subject to child protection plan. So proportionately, that's a big increase. We've managed that capacity, managed that demand within our resources, but we're also seeing some challenges around recruitment at the moment. Part of that, particularly for agency staff, is that because people are able to work much more from home, it actually means that we're competing with many more authorities. So, if you're an agency worker in the east of England and you can go down to London and stay overnight, perhaps with a friend, and earn an extra £5 to £10 an hour, maybe you'll do that. So we have some challenges in terms of recruitment of agency staff, particularly at the moment, which is a shame in some senses, because actually I think in terms of our overall kind of improvement journey, we have made some really strong progress over the last couple of years. Recruitment, we just need to make sure doesn't kind of push us off a little bit by causing caseloads to rise. In terms of children in care, as I kind of hinted at just in the finance report, our children in care numbers have continued to reduce. That's a good thing. We're now back in line with statistical neighbour averages, and that has been very much as a result of family safeguarding that we've implemented in Cambridgeshire, which is a focused form of work with families with the most complex needs, and is evidence-based at reducing numbers of children and young people in care. But the national picture continues to be an increase in the number of children in care, and that is really having an impact now on placements. So we've got a real challenge around identifying suitable placements for children and young people in care, and particularly young people with more complex needs. And it's a great concern to me that we will have 14, 15-year-olds and no placements available. It's a very, very difficult situation. It's a national situation, but it's a very challenging one. So that picture is also driving up the cost, which is why we're also seeing some cost increases. So there are some real challenges there, but I think we should also be optimistic. As I say, we are maintaining numbers of children and young people in care. They are reducing, and we are coming out of a summer period as well, and that's when the placement market is most tight. So hopefully it will start to ease, and we'll start to see things loosen up. And also, as I say, as children start to be established in school, we'll start to see some of the complexity and the demand reduce, I hope. I'll take some questions.
Thank you. So we'll open it up for debate. Councillor Nethsinger.
It's not really debate, it's just a massive thank you to Lou for a very extensive and thorough report and for all the work that your team have done over the summer, just in the same way that Jonathan's have. And we do understand it's a really difficult time with high levels of need coming in and really complex cases post-COVID. So do pass on our enormous thanks to the teams for everything that they're doing at the moment. Thanks.
I absolutely will do. Thank you.
Councillor King.
Thank you, Lou. Just a question about, in the context of, as you said, there is a huge shortage of places for children with complex needs. I think there was a notion that the government is planning to relax the regulations which will allow the Ofsted registration of those places. Could you possibly comment if you heard anything recently on where this is and when we might expect this kind of welcome piece of regulation which might ease the pressure somewhat on all of us and other local authorities?
So I wish I could. There is no indication at the moment. What has happened unhelpfully is that Ofsted, not Ofsted, the Department for Education has put in place a piece of legislation which now makes it illegal to make a placement of a 15 or a 16-year-old or anybody under the age of 16, in provision which is not registered by Ofsted. Now in Cambridgeshire we have historically had very, very few, if any, young people in that type of provision, and always for a very short period of time, because we've literally not been able to find anything that's registered, but usually we can shortly afterwards. There are a small, as I understand it, there's about 20 local authorities who regularly use that type of provision. They've all been supported to move their children out of that type of provision, which has exacerbated the pressure on registered provision for the rest of us. Ofsted the DfE had said that they would redraft the Children's Homes regulations before they introduced that change in legislation. They haven't done so, unfortunately. The thing around the Children's Homes regulations is that they were written in 1989, or for the 1989 Children Act. Things have changed enormously since then. And so, for example, what we very often need is a very small, bespoke, focused kind of intervention for a young person with challenging needs that we can set up with using approved providers. We can set up and we can get into place on the same day, because we're talking about that type of a crisis kind of situation. Actually, it takes 6 months to register that type of provision, so under the current kind of regulations. So it's needing to have some flexibility to enable local authorities to do more to meet that kind of pressing need, while also obviously maintaining the safeguards, because the children's homes need to have effective safeguards. DfE are saying that they are about to start consulting on those regulations, but they haven't given a time frame yet as to when they'll be fully drafted and published.
Councillor Daunton.
Yes, thank you. Could you say a little more about the recruitment issue and what it's possible to do to deal with that? I mean, do we have in place special arrangements for recruitment, help with housing, golden hellos, all that kind of thing? Have all those things been explored? Is there more that can be done?
We are working with a couple of the district councils, or starting to, around housing. It's quite a complex area actually to offer in terms of key work housing, as I'm sure you'll know, but we're certainly open to looking at those sorts of situations. We're just about to launch a new kind of dynamic campaign. We haven't had a campaign. We've had the same campaign rather for a little while, so it's got a bit, I think it gets a bit tired. It's, you need to kind of refresh. So that's about to launch shortly in terms of permanent recruitment. We work really hard and closely with universities and colleges around newly qualified staff, and we're successful at recruiting newly qualified staff into the organisation, and we're much better at holding on to them now. But you can only have a certain number of them at any one time, because they have to have a protected caseload, and they can only do some certain types of work. And we're also working very closely with our agency providers, so we're doing all sorts of things. Golden Hellos, I think we have looked at those in the past. They have some benefits sometimes, but they also have the disadvantage of upsetting staff who haven't received a golden hello because they've been in the organisation for a bit longer. So there are things that we're looking at that might be around helping to enhance and retain staff rather than perhaps using the golden hello, so we can kind of not upset our existing and established staff.
Okay, thank you, Lou. On this, we've been asked to note the information relating to the performance of children's services in Cambridgeshire. Note that while numbers of children in care continue to decline, a number of factors are resulting in an increase in placement costs, and note the actions being explored to address placement availability for children and young people in care, which we've done. Thank you for joining us, Lou. Item 11 is an opening update and overview of business planning proposals for 2022 to 2027. The service directors for both children's services and education will introduce this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think those of you that are familiar with the process, we are taking early steps in now to the budget setting for 22-23. And the purpose of the paper is really to set the financial context for the council, and then you'll read in later section much of what Lou's mentioned in his report and I've mentioned in previous reports are the cost and emerging pressures that we are facing and need to be considered as part of that process. I think, given the time and the very thoroughness of the report, I think, hoping people have read it, that we're happy to just revert, Chair, straight to questions. And deal with the individual elements of our services if and when required. Thank you.
Any questions from committee? Councillor Sharp?
Thank you, Chairman. It's more a comment than a question. Just 2 points. 5.21, I'm looking at, it mentions some fully costed options, which presumably will come to the December meeting, so I'm looking forward to at seeing those. And the second on 5.31 on page 179, I'm looking at the wording on the second paragraph, range of cost avoidance strategies. Isn't that just another word for budget cuts? Thank you, Chairman.
So if I deal with the, sorry, I get the numbering right, 5.21 first, and then I think Lou will deal with the second. So just to say that report around capacity has been brought forward. We have severe pressure under meeting our statutory requirements for education, health and care plans. That is an absolute critical part of it. So again, yeah, we will reflect on that going forward. But I have to say, the support is there. It's just a case of considering against the wider council objectives for the funding. I think the next one's mine as well. So the cost avoidance. Yes. Yeah. Darn, I nearly passed it on to Lou then. That would have been, I thought it was special guardianship orders. So, what you'll get from me in my next service director report is that we have done a huge amount of work looking at where we are with SEND. We've got a number of work streams that, again, we're looking at the cost of implementing and reviewing. I think we have to be absolutely realistic about making cuts in the SEND world. That is not possible through our statutory objectives, but we can look at different ways of delivering and look at ways that we may be able to avoid future spend through investment early. So what you're going to get is a very much a view on how services change to be more proactive and support the needs of children without going through statutory processes, which I think covers what I covered in the previous report.
Councillor Nessinger.
Actually, Jonathan's just said mostly what I was going to say, which is that in the space of SEND and education, health and care plans, I don't think cost avoidance is always about cuts. Sometimes it's about making sure that children and particularly their families get the support that they need early enough. And sometimes that means getting support and possibly occasionally quite robust conversations with mainstream schools about the support that they need to be giving to children and their families to make sure that the schools are fulfilling their statutory responsibilities, which may mean that slightly fewer costs come our way. And that's better for the children. It's not necessarily about reducing, about
about not meeting their needs. It's about making sure we meet them early so that they can continue in mainstream education. Thanks.
Councillor Hay.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also looking at paragraph 5.31. You mentioned the service has currently identified a potential 250,000 saving in relation to special guardianship orders for 22-23. Will that be a year-on-year saving, and can you be a bit more explicit as to where that saving is coming from?
Absolutely. So where it's coming from in the first instance is that we have reduced numbers of children and young people coming into care, and particularly in terms of family safeguarding, that's effective at younger children, at preventing younger children from coming into care. The type of special guardianship orders that attract an allowance that local authorities have to pay, or where a child is the subject of special guardianship order as a direct alternative to being in care. So as we've reduced numbers, we are not spending so much on allowances, which means that we can offer a saving. And yes, it would be a year-on-year saving.
Thank you. So we move to the report recommendations. Co-opted members do not have a vote on this item. We're being asked to note the overview and context provided for the 2022-23 to 26-27 business plan, which we've done, and to comment on the list of proposals set out in section 5.3 and endorse their development. So with those in favour of the recommendations, please raise their hands now. And that's unanimous, I think, Rashenda. Thank you. So the final item on today's agenda is the committee agenda plan, training plan and appointments. Rashenda, I think you've got an update on this.
Thank you, Chair. An update to the published committee agenda plan. Just for the committee to note that the October reserve meeting date has now been confirmed, and that will be used for business planning. And also to note that on the 30th of November, a new item has been added to the agenda, which is the approval to tender for early years provision in Cambridgeshire.
Do we have any questions on that? Councillor Slatter.
Yes, I had a note to myself to bring up the issue of training for councillors about foster care and what was involved in being a foster carer. As Councillor Hayes so kindly reminded the meeting. The note I wanted to make though, given that it's number 8, by the way, in the agenda plan, we haven't got a date on it yet, but I would like that to be inviting all members of the council. I mean, we have this corporate parenting responsibility. Wasn't quite clear from the way it was phrased, and I want to make sure, if this committee agrees, that it should be all members that are invited to learn, and then hopefully you'd have more people understanding better. And it shouldn't just be the corporate bearing sub and the young people's committee or anything like that, but it should be everybody and encouraged to come along.
I think we could support that, definitely. Lou.
So just to let you know, we are looking at dates. I think it's important to make it a little bit broader than that, so to incorporate the work of foster carers, but actually to theme it around understanding the journey of the child in the care system and the kinds of placements and the way that their needs are met through different kinds of placements. But we're working on that at the moment.
Are there any comments on the committee training plan? I think you've mentioned one, but any further comments? No. Finally, we have committee appointments. Rashenda, would you like to take us through these, please?
Yeah, the committee is invited to note the appointments which have been made by the Executive Director for People and Communities since the June committee meeting under her delegated authority, and in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the committee and with CYP spokes. Those were shown in the published papers and they were shown in italics. The committee today is invited to appoint Councillor Slatter as the committee's third appointee to the Standing Advisory Council on Religious Education. The existing appointees are Councillors Prentice and Boulat. The committee is invited to note that there's one vacancy remaining for a CYP nominee to the Cambridgeshire Community Services NHS Foundation Trust Quarterly Liaison Group. That appointment will actually be made by the Adults and Health Committee. The existing appointees are Councillors Goodliff and Maria King. And finally, following Council's decision on the 20th of July to accept the recommendations of the Independent Remuneration Panel in relation to the appointments to the Fostering Panel, this will no longer attract a special responsibility allowance. Instead, any elected members appointed to the Fostering Panel will receive the same allowance as other appointees. All members will be advised of future vacancies on the Fostering Panel and are encouraged to consider whether they might want to apply.
Thank you. We will move to the vote on this. Sorry? Councillor Hay, sorry.
I'm sorry, Rashenda, I didn't quite hear what you said about the fostering panel.
If I just repeat that, so it was discussed obviously at Council on the 20th of July, the recommendations of the Independent Remuneration Panel. So the elected members who are on the fostering panel will no longer attract a special responsibility allowance, but they would receive the same allowance as any other appointee to the fostering panel. So any elected members who wish to apply obviously would still...
Can I just come back there, because I think it's still on record that I did put in a wish to go onto the fostering panel and was told I'd be contacted nearer the time when this was agreed. So I'd just like to make sure that that's on record. But also I have a question about the Cambridge Community Services NHS Foundation Trust Quarterly Liaison Group. I was a bit surprised to see the Adult and Health Committee has invited CYP to nominate up to 3 representatives onto this. The reps to be appointed are only 3. And as health now comes under adults, I feel it's important that that 3rd place should be taken up by a member of adults, so that when they attend these meetings, it can be reported back to the Adults Committee.
I think my understanding is that Adults and Health Committee do also appoint to that, but they had asked children and young people to make some nominees, but I can check that and come back to you, Councillor.
But it says here they've invited up to 3, but as there's only 3 places, and I feel it's important that this would normally be reported back to the Health Committee, that the 3rd place should be taken up by a member of adults.
I'm happy to, I'll clarify that and come back to you.
Thank you. So if we move to vote on the appointment of Councillor Slatter as the committee's 3rd nominee to the Standing Advisory Council on Religious Education. Co-opted members do not have voting rights on this item. Unless anyone objects, I will take that as having been approved unanimously. Thank you. Which leaves the 1 remaining vacancy, but if we clarify that position and then send it round to spokes afterwards, if that's okay. Thank you. The date of the next committee is Tuesday the 19th of October, which is the reserve committee date, which now has been confirmed. I'd like to thank all of the officers for all of their work in today and preparing all the reports prior to this meeting, and I declare this meeting closed. Thank you all.